Hello there, our spectators. I present you Mr. Enrique Goldman. It's an amazing producer and director. He created the movies, who created historia in our cinematography. You will see, I recommend his movies. Good morning, Mr. Goldman.
Denis, Rosca, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here to speak to your audience. And an honor.
We know you have Bessarabian roots. Tell us, please, the story of your family.
Well, my grandfather is from the town of Briceni. Well, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother from Briceni, and my grandfather from Sucriani. From Sucriani, which is Sucriani, I believe now is in 30 kilometers away, is in Ukraine.
Yes.
I visited 5 years ago these towns, and my grandparents immigrated to Brazil at around 27. And it's interesting the circumstances in which they arrived in Brazil, because what happened is that, as you probably know, most Bessarabian Jews had immigrated to North America. Millions of them had immigrated to North America, but in 1923, the American authorities established quotas for immigration of Jews to America. So the Jews started to immigrate to Brazil and Argentina. My grandfather had an uncle who was already in Rio de Janeiro. So when he was 16, he went by himself to Rio de Janeiro to meet his uncle. And he started a business trading timber. Mm-hmm. There are forests in the south of Brazil, and Brazil was being very urbanized at the time. The country was becoming increasingly more urbanized. So he opened a business selling timber in Rio de Janeiro. And then when he wanted to marry, he came back to his hometown, and a marriage was kind of arranged. In the old days, was very common among Jews in Eastern Europe. And so he married my grandmother, and they immigrated together to Rio de Janeiro, back to Rio de Janeiro. And that's on my mom's side. On my father's side, they are from Poland, from Galicia.
But you have roots in Chisinau also.
No, I was wrong. It's not Chisinau. I get confused. It's Briceni and with the other one that I'm. Yes, Ukraine. Yes. And so I grew up in Rio. I remember that we always ate mameliga. My grandmother always made mameliga, and I thought it was Brazilian food. Only later on I realized it was not from Bessarabia with her.
Our honorary consul of Moldova in São Paulo, Mr. Flavio Bittelman, he's a great man. It's a big diplomat. He also have his roots in Secureni. Maybe you are relatives. Maybe yes.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. There was one of the Brazil's foremost journalists, someone who died many years ago. He was also from Sucriani, and yes.
Yes, and Brazil is good. Tell me, please, how big is your dynasty in Brazilia?
Well, my Bessarabian grandparents had 2 children, my mom and my aunt. Each one of them had 3 children. And if you are going to include, so we're 6, so my cousin's children, I think we're a family of 20 altogether.
Tell me, please, how you start to work in cinematography? Why cinematography?
Well, I always wanted to, I don't know, my mom loved films and and theater. So I grew up, and music, grew up surrounded by films, and then I always wanted to show off. I was a very big extroverted, and a big show off as a child. And then when I started to think about I discovered film as something that I really wanted to do. And I moved to New York when I was 19, and I started to do internships, and then I started filming weddings and bar mitzvahs at the weekends to make money. So I started my filmmaking career filming wedding parties and bar mitzvahs in New York, New Jersey, Long Island area. And then I started to write, and then I moved to Italy. I went to where I was working for a TV station in Italy. And I went to drama school, to theater school in Rome. And then I started to write screenplays, and then I started to work on films.
Why you choose to work in UK and not in America?
Well, because I had lived in New York for 4 years, and I really wanted to go to Europe, because I felt that, you know, coming from the new world, I wanted to see the, you know, old Europe and be influenced by, you know, the art that I love, by the, you know, for the places that I read about in books and the films. So I really wanted, I love Italian neorealism. So I really wanted to spend time in Italy. So I went to Rome. And then I spent 7 years in Rome. And then I just wanted to go to a place that was more cosmopolitan than Rome. And I didn't want to go back to the UK. So London seemed to be the obvious place for me to explore. So I moved to London.
I see your content of movies in IMDb. I am shocked. You created the films with big emotional content, like movie 492. This, what emotion you have when you read the first time the history of this man?
I immediately started to think how it would be like to be him. How it would be like to be him, and thinking about the context. Because Brazil is one of the most violent countries in the world. There are a lot of weapons around, and there is a lot of social injustice. And in certain places, life is very worthless. And so that seemed to be an interesting theme to explore, you know, this idea of how it was like to be someone who's killing other human beings, and his relation with the Brazilian society and socio-economical context. So that's immediately I thought, oh, this is something I really want to explore in a film.
But what was the reaction of the public when see this emotional movie?
And in one of the first screenings, I was there with the writer, the guy, the journalist, Claxton, he's an investigative journalist, who found out about this whole story and wrote a book. The film is based on his book. And we were, after the screening, doing a Q&A, question and answers with the audience. And the first this gentleman raised his hand and said, listen, I am a sheriff, I work for the police, and I want to arrest this guy, and making a big scene. And the writer, Classic, said, can I answer it? I was going to answer, but he said, can I answer? I said, of course, please go ahead and answer. And Classic said, if you are working for the police, you must be ashamed, he said, because it takes you to wait all these years for someone to write a book and someone to write a film to talk about arresting someone. And all these years, this man has been free because he's buying local police. And, you know, so it's a very complicated story. My country is very complicated. Lovely country, wonderful country, but also very complicated.
What is the difference of between cinematography in Brazil, cinematography in US, and cinematography in Europe? What is the difference?
I think because in America we talk mostly about mainstream American cinema. It's very hard for anyone to compete with this level of production, distribution. There is so much, it's such a big industry and so global. Brazilian films will never compete with American films. We lack the budget, we lack the distribution. It's a language that, you know, only in Portuguese, in Brazil, Portugal, Angola, Mozambique, and a few other African countries speak. So it's very hard to penetrate globally, with very few exceptions. So I think this is what really makes a very, very big difference, the language and the distribution and the production. And the same goes to European cinema. But in Britain, if you are a film director, a cinematographer, an actor, or a scriptwriter, you can work with America. And that's different, you know. So, yeah, I think that is the main, I would say that's the main difference.
You want to create this movie about your family roots in Bessarabia? You have this plan?
No, I would be very interested in I don't know, finding out. No, I thought that you had asked me, maybe you misunderstood me. I thought that you asked me if I were to do something Bessarabia, what I would do. And as the first thought that occurred to me was that something that would have to do with my ancestry, something like this.
What do you know the Brazilians about Bessarabia or about Moldova?
Well, for Brazilians, it's so confusing. The changing maps of Europe, because in Brazil Brazil has been the same, has had the same map basically since the 1500s. And that's what you know. That's the country, that's the language, and that's it. So it's very confusing for Brazilians. You have to really to study history in order for you to understand how in different types there were different empires and later on different nations, and how the wars change in one type. So I never understood how my grandmother spoke Romanian. Wow. Okay. Wow. And they said they're Bessarabian. So it's like Bessarab, and yet her hometown is in Moldavia. So it's a very confusing. You have to really, I had to really to understand how, and also in her passport, it said that she was Russian. So it's a big confusion and yet, and on the top of it, we're Jewish. So it's like it's one thing on the top of the other. I remember once my grandmother had a big problem with Russians. She really didn't like Russians, and she once my mother took us to the Moscow circus, and she was booing at the end because she didn't like anything to have to do with Russia. But she So we did. I had to only when I went to visit Moldavia that I realized, for instance, that my grandfather's hometown was in Ukraine, wasn't even in Moldavia. So it's a big confused. There's a big confusion. So even for Brazilian Jews, this is very confusing.
Mm-hmm. Let's speak about your famous movie Princesa.
Yeah.
How you get this idea to create this movie with controversy? With it's not simple. Please tell us this movie.
Okay. When I lived in Rome for 7 years, and there was a local bookshop in Rome where there was a lovely man who sold books, who he was very influential in showing me the most interesting Italian books about Italian literature and theater. And whenever I went to the shop, he wanted to show me something. He was like a teacher for me. He was a very simple man, but this bookseller, he was always showing me interesting books. And once I went to his shop, and showed me this book called Princesa, which was can you hear me? Is it recording?
Yes.
Princesa, which was an account of the life of a Brazilian transvestite prostitute, but it was written by one of the Red Brigade, the Italian terrorist group, that in the 70s he was very, very, very well known. I don't like the term terrorist because it's a relative thing, you know. But anyway, he and this Brazilian transvestite was arrested, and so he met her, Fernanda, in jail, and Fernanda was trying to kill herself. She was suicidal, and in order to save her, these Red Brigade former terrorists, they said, "Oh, listen, I'm going to write your story. We're going to make a book." And she told him her story, and he wrote this fascinating book. And as a Brazilian living in Italy, I had already noticed how many Brazilian transvestite prostitutes there were on the streets, that there was a big market for Brazilian transvestite prostitutes in Italy. But I mean, really, really an incredibly active market. And then I decided I read a book and I said, "Oh, what a fantastic thing, I want to make a film." So that's, and I think, like, I look for characters that are looking for themselves, people who are kind of lost, you know, people in search for identity. And I cannot think of any more a stronger search than if someone is having this kind of gender search for someone's gender, you know, someone who's entrapped. It was a story about someone who was entrapped in a different body. So it is a story of this lovely human being who was trying to find herself in the world. Very young and very lovely. And it was an incredible experience to work on that film.
This movie have the audience young people or adult people more?
You see, in different places, they market it in a different way. In America, it was marketed as an LGBT plus market. In Italy, it was marketed as a kind of an erotic film. And in Brazil, it was marketed as a Brazilian abroad. So I don't know. It's not meant to be nothing erotic, although there are some sex scenes in the film. But the idea is not. The idea is not for people to be sexually aroused. It's just to help people think about how lives can be different and people who are looking for different things in lives. And I thought that it was, I wanted to make a film in which people would identify with someone with that kind of dilemma, like Nanda.
You worked in Rome. You created this film in Italy.
In Milan. That was filmed in Milan. In north of Italy.
You have a big numbers of people who go to casting.
Yes, in order, I wanted to make the film with a real Brazilian transvestite prostitute. Okay. So I spent 6 months traveling from north to south of Italy, interviewing Brazilian transvestite prostitutes working in Italy. We interviewed more than 2,000. Yes. And it was an amazing experience.
You need to go in Moldova to speak with 2,000 of Moldovan actors or people to help develop his skills. You are a teacher of acting arts?
Well, I am developing a few film projects, and I'm also teaching in film schools. Yes. Script writing and directing mostly.
Please come in Moldova to help our cinematography industry. Because
I will be delighted to come. I would be delighted. I'll be very reconnect with. I feel like traveling in your country or in Poland. I can't stop thinking about what has it been like from a country to over such a short period of time having a big population that just disappeared. There is a void in your country. I didn't know. I couldn't feel so well because I spent only a few days. But in Poland, I feel that there is a vacuum that was left there. There were 3 million Jews living in Poland. And after a period of 5 years, they were gone. Almost 12% of the population was Jewish. Imagine a country, 12% of the population disappeared. So it left ghosts there. And I'm very, very happy if I could be part of a reconnection somehow, if it's at all possible. Because I think there is something in, my Bessarabian grandparents were different from the Polish. There's something about the culture that was very different. Anyway, so I would be delighted to come in the future.
About your grandparents, do you know some words in Romanian?
If I know what, sorry?
Words. Do you know words in Romanian?
Words. Mameliga. And I know when I was I spent a few days in Bucharest, and I was surprised at how I could read and understand a lot. I was surprised at how much I could understand. Mostly reading, not so much when people spoke, but when it came to reading, I could understand a lot because of the Portuguese and Italian. being a Roman, Latin language. So, is the Moldavian language very different from the Romanian?
No, it's the same.
Is it different accent, perhaps, or different?
Maybe accent, but it's the same language. In my book, The Great Encyclopedia of Bessarabian Jews, we have alive 4 persons who have a Nobel Prize with Bessarabian roots, like you. And we speak with him and also invite Moldova to work together. And it's a beautiful project to connect people who have the same roots. I am sure more of people will find relatives, the cousins or another part of family, in with this our project. We will try to find in your relatives in our country.
Yes, I will ask my mom about my uncles' names and date of birth and information about my grandparents as well.
You are a screen reader or only production?
Both direction and script writing.
Oh, it's a beautiful. In Moldova exists. You need to come to Moldova. If Moldova invite you to work together, please tell us when you have the time and when period you can come in the September or another time.
Okay. Well, now we are in touch, and so you tell me if for the film school to get in touch. If you want to get in touch, we decide on a good time for me to come, and I would be very happy to.